Chapter 3. Evidence. Marsh. The medical bay was a museum of horrors, and Elliot Marsh couldn't stop cataloguing them. He moved through the space with the systematic attention of a man who'd spent 20 years studying biological anomalies on worlds that didn't want to be understood. 2 decades of fieldwork had given him a particular relationship with the grotesque. Not immunity, not indifference, but a professional distance that allowed him to observe what others couldn't look at and extract meaning from what others saw only as nightmare. The medbay was small. He'd read the colony's facility specifications on the atavist, and the room matched them. A single examination table, a diagnostic station, a wall-mounted storage unit for pharmaceuticals, a basin, a desk with a terminal. Standard Horizon Colonial Medical Suite, designed to handle minor injuries and routine health maintenance, not equipped for anything beyond basic trauma care. The equipment was outdated by at least 1 generation, which was typical of frontier postings where Horizon's investment calculus prioritized extraction infrastructure over personnel welfare. The room was intact. No structural damage, no barricade marks, no blood on the walls. Whatever had happened in the canteen had not happened here. The medbay had been abandoned rather than attacked. Equipment left in place, drawers open, the detritus of a doctor who had left in a hurry and hadn't come back. Okoro had assigned David to accompany him while the rest of the team continued clearing the upper level. David was at the desk terminal, coaxing the battery back up to surrender whatever data it had preserved. Marsh was examining the room, his helmet cam recording everything, his hands, gloved, always gloved, touching surfaces and objects with the light, exploratory contact of a scientist reading a space. The desk belonged to the colony's chief medical officer, a nameplate on the wall, partially obscured by a taped-up schedule of shift rotations. Dr. M. Okoro. Below it, a framed photograph that had been knocked askew. A woman, dark-skinned, serious-eyed, standing on what looked like a university campus. Earth. Another life. Marsh righted the photograph without thinking about why and moved on. The pharmaceutical storage was mostly untouched. Standard colonial medical supplies, analgesics, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, sedatives. Some items had been removed, their slots empty, the labels readable. He noted which medications were missing: high-dose antipyretics, broad-spectrum antiparasitics, surgical anesthetic. The selections told a story. Someone had been treating a condition they couldn't identify, pulling medications that addressed symptoms rather than causes, working through the pharmacological options the way a doctor does when the diagnosis eludes them. "I've got partial data," David said from the terminal. "Battery kept the local drive alive. The network's dead, but anything saved locally is still here. Medical logs, lots of them. Dated from 6 years of entries. The most recent are from the last week of operations." Start with the last week. David worked the interface. The screen flickered, low power, degraded display, and text appeared. Medical log entries time-stamped, authored by MC Okoro. Marsh leaned over David's shoulder and read. The early entries were routine. Shift injury reports. A case of respiratory infection. Vitamin D deficiency across multiple colonists, which was endemic to underground settlements. A note about pharmaceutical resupply requests that had been submitted to Horizon and not yet fulfilled. The mundane maintenance of 400 human bodies in an environment that was slowly degrading them. Then, the entries changed. Day 7 post-expedition. Engstrom K, presenting with subcutaneous discoloration, mid-back, spreading. Tissue palpation reveals anomalous density beneath affected area. Ultrasound imaging shows thread-like structures in subcutaneous layer, non-vascular, non-neural, origin unknown. Patient reports deep pruritus, increased appetite, chronic low-grade headache. Onset correlates with Survey Team 6, return from Chamber 9 expedition. Marsh read the entry twice. Thread-like structures, subcutaneous integration. He felt the familiar acceleration of his scientific mind, the pattern recognition, the hypothesis formation, the urgent need to understand that had driven his entire career, and that Horizon had learned to point like a weapon at problems they wanted solved. "Keep going," he said. David scrolled, more entries. The clinical language remained steady, but the content escalated. Day 9, post-expedition. Engstrom condition progressing. Discoloration now covers approximately 40% of torso. Subcutaneous structures increasingly dense and organized. Ultrasound shows branching network extending through fascial planes and integrating with musculature. Attempted surgical biopsy of affected tissue results inconclusive. Material resists standard cutting instruments. Have contacted Administrator Sadiq regarding quarantine protocols. Day 9 post-expedition. Supplemental. Reyes T. Presenting with localized discoloration, posterior neck, approximately 2 centimeters diameter. Ultrasound confirms presence of thread-like structures consistent with Engstrom pathology. Onset delayed relative to Engstrom. Progression appears slower. Patient is alert, oriented, and cooperative. He is aware of his condition and its implications. Day 10. Post-expedition. Ren, J. Status unknown. Has not reported to medical despite repeated requests. Staging area logs indicate continued solo excursions to lower levels, increasingly prolonged. Hargreaves reports he is descending past surveyed sections without equipment. Recommend security intervention. Day 10 post-expedition, supplemental. Novak, P. Has entered lower levels without authorization. Status unknown. Pattern consistent with Ren. Compulsive behavior oriented toward the deep cave system. Working hypothesis. The organism exerts neurological influence on hosts, compelling them toward the point of origin. This is consistent with parasitic behavior in terrestrial organisms. The host is redirected to an environment that benefits the parasite's life cycle. Marsh straightened up. His mind was running full tilt now, the patterns assembling themselves into a picture that was simultaneously terrifying and magnificent. A parasitic organism that integrated with human tissue, restructured it, and altered host behavior to serve its reproductive cycle. The biological complexity alone was staggering. The implications for Horizon's biotech division were... He stopped that thought. Not because it was wrong. It wasn't wrong, the implications were real and significant, but because the room he was standing in had belonged to a woman who had watched this happen to people she knew, people she was responsible for, and had documented it with a clinical precision that Marsh recognized as the last defense of a mind that was breaking. He let the thought stop. He'd come back to it later. Right now, he was a scientist in a dead woman's office reading her notes, and the least he owed her was attention. "Is there more?" he asked. "Plenty. The last entries are..." Davidge paused. The stylus that was never far from his hand had appeared, and it wasn't tapping. It was still. "The last entries are bad, Dr. Marsh." "Show me." Day 11. Post-expedition 0347. Engstrom emergence. Full documentation follows. The entry was long. Clinical, exhaustive. Dr. Okoro had recorded everything. The acceleration of the physical transformation, the structural changes to the host body, the splitting of the skin along predetermined lines, the emergence of the organism from within the host's remains. She had documented it in the language of medicine because medicine was the only framework she had, and the framework had been wholly inadequate to contain what she was describing. Marsh read the emergence account with the focus of a man who understood he was looking at the most significant biological document in human history. The organism didn't merely consume the host, it converted the host. Every cell, every gram of tissue disassembled and reassembled into a new biological architecture. The process was total. Nothing of the host remained except raw material, repurposed into something else. The efficiency was beyond anything terrestrial biology could achieve. The speed was impossible by any standard Marsh understood. And the result, the juvenile organism that had emerged from Carl Engström's body, had displayed immediate motor function, environmental awareness, and problem-solving capability. It had torn a steel ventilation grate from the wall within seconds of emergence. It had accessed the colony's infrastructure through the ventilation system. It had disabled the power grid within 30 minutes. Newborn, minutes old, already more capable than any organism Marsh had ever studied. "David," Marsh said, "copy everything, every file on this terminal. Medical logs, personal notes, anything Dr. Okoro saved locally. All of it." "Already on it." David had a portable drive connected to the terminal, the transfer indicator blinking steadily. "There's also imaging, ultrasound files. You want those too?" "Everything." Marsh moved to the quarantine rooms. There were 3, arranged along a short corridor behind the main med bay. Small rooms, 4 meters by 3, each with a bed, a chair, and a monitoring station. He tried room 1 first. The door was sealed, maglock, same as the rest of the colony's electronic systems, held in place by residual charge. "I need this door opened," Marsh called. David came over, assessed the lock mechanism, and produced a tool that looked like it had been designed for a different purpose and modified for this one. 30 seconds of work, and the magnetic seal released with a dull clunk. Marsh pushed the door open. The room was dark. His helmet light filled it in sections. Bed, chair, monitoring station, walls. The ventilation grate in the ceiling was covered by a steel plate welded in place. Someone had sealed it deliberately, shutting off the room's connection to the colony's ventilation system, protecting whoever was inside from whatever was in the ducts. The bed was occupied. Marsh had seen death in many forms across many worlds. He'd examined alien organisms in various states of decay. He'd dissected things that didn't have names and catalogued anatomies that didn't follow any terrestrial logic. He was not easily disturbed by the physical reality of biological processes. Tomas Reyes disturbed him. The body on the bed was not intact. It had not been intact for some time. The process that Dr. Okoro had documented in Carl Engström had happened here too. The same progression, the same conversion, the same terrible metamorphosis from human to something else. But in this room, sealed and locked, the process had completed without an exit. The organism had emerged, had consumed its host, and had found itself in a space it couldn't leave. The welded vent, the mag-sealed door, a box designed to contain a human patient, now containing something that was no longer human and had no way out. What remained on the bed was a confusion of biological material that Marsh's trained eye could partially sort into categories, but couldn't fully reconcile. Human remains, bone fragments, desiccated tissue, the collapsed architecture of a body that had been used up. And alongside them, intertwined with them, the remains of something else, dark, dense material, the same composition described in the geological reports, curled and hardened into shapes that suggested a body that had formed, lived briefly in this sealed space, and died. The organism that had grown inside Tomas Reyes had been born into a coffin. It had emerged, it had lived, and it had starved or suffocated in a room 4 meters by 3, with a welded vent above and a locked door it couldn't breach. Marsh stood in the doorway and absorbed this. The scientist in him was cataloguing tissue samples, structural analysis, the potential to reconstruct the organism's anatomy from its remains. The human in him, the part he kept partitioned, the part that Horizon hadn't quite managed to overwrite, was looking at the bed and seeing a 26-year-old man who had locked himself in a room to die because the alternative was becoming something that would kill the people around him. The datapad was on the bed. Cracked screen, dark, resting beside the remains as though placed there deliberately. A final act. The last thing Thomas Reyes had done as a human being. Marsh picked it up carefully, turning it over in his gloved hands. He pressed the power button. Nothing. Battery dead. He connected his portable power supply, a standard field kit component, designed for exactly this kind of data recovery. And waited. The screen flickered, powered on. Low resolution, cracked display, but functional. The emergency communication interface was open, the last application Thomas had used. The text field was filled, a long message, carefully composed, the words of a man who had known he was writing the last thing he would ever write. Marsh read it. He read the whole thing, every word. The account of the expedition, the description of the symptoms, the documentation of the life cycle, the tactical information about the creature's capabilities, the geological analysis, the warnings. Burn it if you can, leave it if you can't, but do not dig. He read the parts that Horizon had redacted from his briefing, the explicit description of the parasitic life cycle, the warning about the formations and their role as a vector, the plea to classify the planet as hostile and interdicted, the raw, undisguised desperation of a man who understood exactly what was happening and couldn't stop it. Horizon had removed these sections because they complicated the narrative. A hostile organism was a problem to be managed. A parasitic life cycle that used humans as construction material was a problem that might require abandoning a significant capital investment. And an explicit warning from the last survivor to never return was directly contrary to the mission objectives that had brought Marsh to this room. He stood in the quarantine room with the dead man's words on the dead man's datapad and felt the architecture of his professional loyalties shift beneath him like tectonic plates. "Dr. Marsh," David's voice from the medbay. "Data transfer is complete. We've got everything from the terminal. You find anything?" Marsh looked at the datapad. He looked at the remains on the bed. He looked at the welded vent in the ceiling. A decision made by a doctor trying to protect a patient from something in the walls. A decision that had sealed the patient in with the thing growing inside him. "Yes," he said. "I found the transmission." "The original? Unredacted?" "Unredacted." A pause from Davidge. The kind of pause that indicated the medic understood the implications, that an unredacted version existed, that a redacted version had been provided, and that the gap between them was a gap someone had created deliberately. "Commander's going to want to see that," Davidge said. "Yes," Marsh said. "She is." He found Okoro in the corridor outside the canteen. She was standing with Karim, reviewing a rough map of the upper level that Karim had been sketching on a datapad as they cleared rooms, marking damage, marking bodies, marking the locations of compromised ventilation grates and barricade points. The map was a portrait of a last stand, and it was losing. "Commander," Marsh said, "we need to talk, privately." Okafor looked at him. She had the ability to assess a person's state in a glance, a command skill that Marsh had observed in the best military leaders, and that no amount of academic training could replicate. Whatever she saw in his face, it was enough. She handed the datapad to Karim and followed Marsh to a cleared room down the corridor. He showed her the transmission. The full text, unredacted, on Thomas Reyes's cracked datapad. Okafor read it. She read it with the same methodical attention she gave operational briefs, thorough, unhurried, absorbing every detail before forming a response. Marsh watched her face, looking for the reaction, the anger, the recalibration. Her expression didn't change. That was more frightening than if she'd shouted. "How much of this did you already know?" she asked when she finished. It was the question he'd been expecting and the one he'd been preparing for since the quarantine room. He had options. He could claim ignorance, assert that Horizon's briefing to the science team had been as redacted as the one provided to Aegis. He could deflect, point out that the Accord's briefing had likely been edited as well, that Volkov's clean summary was no less sanitized than his own. He could minimize, argue that the redacted details were supplementary, that the core tactical picture hadn't changed, that knowing about the parasitic life cycle in advance wouldn't have altered the mission plan. He could do any of these things. Okafor would know he was lying. She would file that knowledge away, and it would inform every interaction they had for the remainder of the mission. And in a situation where trust was the difference between survival and something worse, that contamination would spread. "I knew about the life cycle," Marsh said. Horizon's briefing to the science team included the parasitic reproduction details. "We were told the organism uses human hosts to construct new organisms. We were told the formations in the cave system are a developmental stage. We were not told about the specific warnings. The plea to interdict the planet, the warning not to return." He paused. "I was told to recover biological specimens and geological samples. Those are my secondary objectives, directly from Horizon's research division." Okafor looked at him. The mask was in place. The commander's face, unreadable, assessing. Behind it, Marsh could sense the calculation happening. What to do with this information? What to do with him? How to incorporate the knowledge that one member of her team had been operating with a different mission brief and a different set of priorities. "You knew the organism could infect people," she said. "You knew the mechanism. You knew what happened to the hosts." "Yes." "And you didn't share that with the team before we entered a space where those organisms are present." The tactical brief covered the infection risk, suit integrity, contamination protocols. The tactical brief said parasitic life cycle, details limited. It didn't say the organism builds a new creature inside your body using your own tissue as raw material. It didn't say the host is consumed alive over a period of days. It didn't say the resulting organism tears its way out of you and starts hunting. Okafor's voice hadn't risen. It had gotten quieter, which was worse. "My people are in that colony right now, Marsh. They're walking through spaces where this organism may still be present. They deserve to know exactly what they were facing." "You're right." "I know I'm right. What I need to know is whether there's anything else. Anything else Horizon told you that you haven't told me. Because if I find out later that you're holding back information that gets one of my people killed or infected, I will leave you on this planet. That's not a threat. It's a logistical decision." Marsh considered. The things he hadn't shared. Horizon's specific interest in the formations as a biotech resource. The directive to secure samples for transport to Horizon's research facility on Europa. The implication, never stated explicitly but understood by anyone who'd worked in corporate science long enough, that the organism's properties represented a commercial opportunity of incalculable value. He told her all of it. Not because he'd had a moral awakening. His morality was the same as it had been when he'd boarded the Atavist, a functional instrument that served his objectives as long as his objectives were served by it. He told her because the room where Thomas Reyes had died had shown him something that his morality hadn't accounted for. The end state. The final consequence of prioritizing acquisition over survival. A young man locked in a box, consumed from the inside by something his body had been tricked into building. Marsh was ambitious. he was not willing to be that. "Horizon wants specimens," he said. "Alive if possible. The formations, tissue samples, anything biological. They want the organism studied, replicated, and developed. They consider it the most significant discovery in the history of colonial expansion. They're not wrong about that, but their calculus doesn't include a line item for the people who die during the acquisition process." And Tanaka? Tanaka knows the geological objectives. She doesn't know the full scope of Horizon's biological interests. She's a geologist, not a xenobiologist. They kept her compartmentalized. Okafor was quiet for a long time. The room around them was dark except for their helmet lights, which cast sharp shadows on the walls of someone's abandoned quarters. A photograph on the desk. A family, smiling, somewhere green and bright. Earth, or a memory of it. "The full transmission goes to the team," Okafor said. "Everyone reads it. Everyone understands what we're dealing with. No more compartmentalization. No more corporate filters. If we're going to survive this, we do it with complete information." "Agreed. And your specimen recovery objectives are suspended, permanently. If Horizon has a problem with that, they can file a complaint with my corpse." Marsh almost smiled. "Agreed. One more thing." Okafor held up the datapad. "This man, Reyes, he locked himself in that room. He knew what was going to happen to him. And instead of panicking, instead of trying to run, he sat down and wrote a message that might save the next people who came here. He included everything. Medical data, geological analysis, tactical observations. He was 26 years old, and he did more in his last hours than most people do in a lifetime." She looked at Marsh with an expression that wasn't anger anymore. It was something harder and more durable. "We're going to honor that. We're going to listen to what he said. And when we get back to the atavist, we're going to make sure his message reaches everyone it was supposed to reach. Unredacted, unedited, every word. Are we clear?" "We're clear." Okafor left the room. Marsh stood alone for a moment, holding the datapad with the cracked screen and the dead man's final words. The room was cold, the dark pressed against the windows of his helmet light. He thought about the remains on the bed in Quarantine Room 1. The thing that had grown inside Tomas Reyes, that had emerged in a sealed room and died there, trapped in 4 meters by 3 of concrete and steel. He thought about the caves below, the formations, the seeds. He thought about what Horizon wanted him to bring back, and what was waiting in the dark for anyone who tried to take it. He pocketed the datapad and went to find the team.